straight up basis. They make a lot more sense now that there was something in those Baghdad museums that they wanted to look at. So Casey, when he's putting together the ARE, it's quite fascinating because he puts together this incredible hospital building. And in 1932, he's there building these things. And it does eventually become the headquarters for the Association for Research and Enlightenment there in Virginia Beach. Now, here's the X twist. You ready? So, one of the key players in the Cuban Revolution is our friend, Frank Sturgis. And Sturgis, whose real name is Fiorini, but his name magically gets changed. And there's an odd crisscross because as someone who spends so much time in Cuba assisting the revolution, and then after assisting Castro getting into power, is tapped by the CIA to help assassinate him, he's right in the heart of that story. He's in the heart of the Watergate story. He's in the heart of a few stories you haven't heard that I'm going to bring up tonight. But here's one. He owned the Top Hat nightclub, which was, well, it was literally only 5 or 10 minutes away from the ARE. So this is an oddness because part of that idea of sending people to study the ARE and the information on the Casey work is already exceptional that we have that on record from the CIA. But the mere fact of placement, and this is something that Mae Brussell was very good at giving us, that when you put somebody here and you put somebody here, it's not guilt by association, but their proximity to something gives them a relationship to it, potentially. And the idea of Frank Sturgis working very close to the Casey Foundation is fascinating from a research point of view, because then he spends all this time down there in the hot zone commandeering this revolution and being used by the CIA and other people. But here we have that crisscross that again shows up, and it shows up with one of his great partners, which is E. Howard Hunt, who was in charge of so many of the CIA operations in Cuba. And what was the book that was his go-to fiction book that was really one of the some 50-odd books that E. Howard Hunt would write? Well, he writes a fictional book in 1949, and it is called Bimini Run. Bimini Run, this is pretty interesting. It's one of those pulp novels in the swashbuckling hero who does all these different things in the hot zone. His name is Sturgis. So some people have studied Sturgis' life and then studied the book and said, oh, he got this directly from Sturgis. And yet the idea generally is that Sturgis didn't meet Hunt until the early 1970s in the Nixon White House as to be part of this plumber unit to go around collecting intelligence through legal means. But that book came out in 1949, and the hero is Hank Sturgis. So if you do a little research on Sturgis and how his name was originally Fiorini and how it came to be Sturgis, his mother remarried someone named Sturgis in 1939, 10 years before this book. So he's, Hunt using the name Sturgis makes sense directly because legally this is his name for 10 years. He would have known him directly as Sturgis. And here he is just planting him right in the middle of his book. But the Bimini part is also quite fascinating because, of course, Bimini is directly where Casey is putting the emphasis along the lines of the Poseidon temples. So we're getting into a crisscross here again around the geopolitics of the hot zone. But on record, in his own testimony before congressional committees and in legal cases, Sturgis talks directly about working right there in Virginia Beach and owning, not only running, but owning this Top Cat nightclub right there. For me, that was too big of an anomaly to leave hanging out there. We're going to get into why in just a minute. Now, and keep in mind our friend Castro putting together this John Lennon statue. That's going to come in handy later. Who's that with Fidel Castro? That's Frank Sturgis. Sturgis is his
It's a very intimate posture.
It is. Uh, that shows that they're pals for sure. Uh, and I think one of the fascinating things about this picture is the kind of friendship trust level exchange. And over again, if you go through the different stories about Castro and the revolution, Sturgis is right there. He's the person that Castro relies on over and over again to help with the training, to help with all these various things. Sturgis, if you check out what our friend, the Secretary of Defense, Forrestal, says about him, he gives him an accommodation at the end of World War II, and he says, this guy is like one of the bravest of the soldiers that we had. He did all these things in the Pacific Theater, just one of the best guerrilla fighters. So when he's going in there, he's such an incredible asset for our friend Castro. And what happens is, at a certain point, of course, Castro's true colors start to emerge, the very deep communism, etc. Um, that socialist Marxist streak that turns into a large scale communism with him. But what's weird, if you go a little bit deeper on that, is that it looks like all those signs were originally there. So, in my opinion, although Sturgis' account is different, it seems to me that somebody is placing him directly next to Castro for the purposes of being a double or triple agent there anyway. So even though he claims, yeah, at a certain point I was doing all this stuff for Castro, and then the CIA approached me, and I realized that Castro was a bad guy working against us, and then I turned against him. No, I think he's put in there directly in the beginning. And even in some of his own accounts, it's quite fascinating because when he's talking about Castro, he's saying, it seems to me that some of the CIA people who are promoting him, they're helping him with this. So the CIA very early on is helping Castro. And what is Castro's big goal? Is to get rid of the Batista regime. Well, Batista, it's very interesting because although he rises to power in 1933 in Cuba, he's very young at that period. And there's a lot of unusual connections that Batista has, but when they go through a reorganization around 1940 in Cuba, he's the president. He takes one term and then he gets out. So he doesn't come back until 1952. So there's this idea of him just being there this whole time, but he's not. He comes into great prominence in the 30s, then he becomes president, then he gets out. That is interesting as well. But also the fact that the Cubans join in on our side during World War II, that's very important. And we have characters like Ernest Hemingway ping-ponging between Bimini and Cuba. One of the things that I've made kind of a great emphasis on in relation to Ernest Hemingway is that he's spending all this time staring at the ocean floor with this boat back and forth. And the boat that he has set up is set up with heavy-duty scientific equipment. And when they ask him what he's doing, he says, well, obviously, I'm looking for German U-boats. The whole thing was absurd. He had no official position to do that one. The boat is scientifically equipped, so it doesn't have guns and things. If you find a U-boat, what are you going to do? The U-boat's going to blow you out of the water. So none of those explanations ever made any sense. When I dug into Hemingway's brother's past, I found as part of his news correspondence as a young journalist, he's in a submarine going back and forth right around the Hudson. And he's in Cuba in a submarine. And I have no doubt, it's acknowledged that he said in the 1950s, while flying in, that he sees a huge city off the western coast of Cuba. I have no doubt that he saw this stuff up close in his submarine. This is where, the whole Hemingway-Casey crisscross goes on. And I've pointed out the closeness of those two families, including the fact that the mother's getting readings directly from Casey about Ernest. And, the fact that members of the Casey family are going to visit the Hemingways. Where do they go? Do they go for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days? we go for a month. I'll be back in a month. That's a close relationship. So the things that Casey is giving about Atlantis and all the rest, all of a sudden, Hemingway, with
Nobody's
his
hearing you.
incredible life as a novelist,
Listen to
he's
what
showing
this
up.
guy says.
Where's he
He's a
living all the
dark
time?
journalist,
He's in Bimini.
on YouTube.
He's in Key West. He's in Cuba. He's right in the heart of the hot zone. And he's doing what? Well, he's living this incredible life and all the rest of it. But the double life part is that he's there and he's part of this hot zone network. And that's part of what we put on the record. And his relationship to Castro when he comes in is quite fascinating as well. We're going to get into that in a minute. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Wise guys in the hot zone. Castro Atlantis mystery, going deep here tonight. And one of the figures there, Frank Sturgis, instantly showing up in an unusual light, working close to the Casey Foundation. We're going to find out why that's important here in a minute. Before we go any further, I want to say, if you're new here, to go to the darkjournalist.com website and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through this remarkable censorship that we're looking at. And we do have this new email server, so it's an even more streamlined process. But basically, once a week, you'll get these incredible details about the shows we have coming up for you, remarkable X-series shows, documentaries, the best interviews, and events that are coming up. And if you want to stand up and be counted and hear about it first, go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for that newsletter. Literally just punch your email in and you're gold. It'll all show up in your inbox. So make sure you do that. Before we go any further tonight, Miss Olivia, you're up.
Catherine Harris says RFK Jr. visited Castro at his home in Cuba when Castro was elderly. Robert discussed this in a recent interview.
Isn't that fascinating? Yes, he did. And there's some interesting things there because it's in my Twitter feed. I didn't print it out for tonight, but there are pictures of him diving off the western coast of Bimini. And that's in 2010, I believe. And I also have photos of him off the Bimini Wall, diving off the Bimini Wall. So, Bobby is just the kind of guy who's tuned in to this, and I have no doubt about it. I think that there was some desire on the part of Bobby's mother where she went down in the 1990s and visited Castro, and there was some desire for closure there about her saying, I don't blame you for what happened, and I don't believe the CIA that you were involved in the Kennedy assassinations. But the other piece of this, which is fascinating, I'm going to bring to light a meeting that John F. Kennedy Jr. had with Castro in 1997 that I believe relates directly to information about the JFK assassination, but may also relate to these hot zone ruins. The story was supposed to bring, JFK was supposed to bring forward this incredible interview with our friend Castro. All these things were going to come out of it. And he went there. There are pictures of the meeting. They had a 5-hour meeting. And it became a very hush-hush thing. Something unusual.
It just got buried.
It did. Why did you mention that, actually? Because I have the story right here, and I'm going to put it in out of sequence here because it came up. But this is the New York Times article, and we get the date on it, October 25th, 1997. John F. Kennedy Jr., one step ahead of the pack, quietly travels to Cuba. John F. Kennedy Jr., the editor of George Magazine, has quietly traveled to Cuba on the 35th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which his father, the president, faced down the Soviet premier Nikita Khrushchev in a nuclear confrontation. But the purpose of his visit was a mystery yesterday. He's there as a journalist, Nancy Haberman, a spokesman for George Magazine, said, insisting she had no other details. Others close to Mr. Kennedy, including his cousin, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., declined to talk about the visit or its significance. United States and Cuban officials also said they had no information. It was unclear whether Mr. Kennedy went on his own or at the behest of Cuba's government, whether an interview with President Fidel Castro had been arranged, or even if the trip was intended to provide a scoop for George. And then they go into this whole thing about John F. Kennedy in 1962. That is one of the pictures of the meeting, and you can see there's a kind of a tension there.
Hey,
Kennedy's
good
sitting
morning, good
across
evening,
the
good afternoon, and welcome to
major
Dreamy
what's
Dreamland.
going on,
And we've been listening to
it's interesting to look
Daniel
at
of
and just figure
Dark
out what
Journalism,
exactly is
DJ,
happening. But for
and you
me,
find him on
there's
YouTube. He
another
has some really good shows.
picture of the meeting, and they don't. It's not the kind of like
I listen to him
all smiles.
as I listen to everyone,
kind of thing.
which I do,
Something serious.
without prejudice of my beliefs. Right? I just kind of listen to what they're
for all we
saying.
know, it was positive.
And
but
when I energetically
whatever it
feel
was,
that,
went
oh,
completely
listen to that,
as soon as he came back, no one talked about
that's
it. No one
how
talked
I
about it. Captain
parse
talked about it. That was
right,
it.
the situation.
So
That's how I
let's
develop
just say that hangs out
my
there as an outline.
insights
It's one of those
to
things
overstand
which,
what's
we
going
get to
on.
John F. Kennedy Jr., we know he's digging a lot.
So our question is, what do you want in your life?
But also,
What do you think
this
is good
whole
life is?
revelation about the hot zone comes into
What are you
play
doing here?
because
Right?
we will find out that the Vatican becomes an aspect of this hot zone story of the Cuban ruins, and that Paulina Zelinsky, the engineer who found, after all, the Cuban city off the western tip of Cuba, she will later come out, most recently, within the past 2 years, with an allegory through the form of a dog. And the dog tells a story about something remarkable discovered in Cuba. We're going to read directly from what she was getting into. Before I go there, though,
What in your
more
life
of
are you
Hemingway
tired of
in the hot zone
doing
that I think it
over and
needs to be
over
pointed
and
out.
over again?
Again,
Freud said when you do the same
we're
thing over
dealing
and over
with
again, expecting a
close
different outcome,
relationship with the Hemingways.
that's the
with
definition
Casey's.
of being
Casey,
nuts.
early on, there were stories about him starting to slip through the remarkable readings that he gave in all of this. And it attracts the attention of Hemingway's mother. And she becomes not only just someone who gets readings, but someone who's a real
Salesman
student, Casey Ward.
makes a sale,
But she has
makes
this
the
son
deal,
she has a
clinches
difficult
the deal,
relationship with. She tries
only
to
to
get
spin
readings
again
how to guide
on
him.
the
One of
wheel
the things that Casey gives us is that
to find another customer.
Hemingway was someone who, when he was in Egypt, he had a kind of a magical personality and something along the lines of having this mind control ability or kind of charisma there, and that some of it was good and some of it didn't do him so well.
Fry cook
But
some kind of dish
in this life, Hemingway, of course, is an extraordinary story.
after dish
His books are
after
some of the
dish,
most legendary.
only to clean the
However,
grill
what's off the
to
record
make another cheeseburger.
are two major pieces. One, his relationship to John Kennedy, which is why, and we've outlined this before, all the material ends up
You mow the
of
yard
Hemingway's at the John F.
only
Kennedy
to have to
Library.
do it again.
And two, the Atlantis Hot Zone research, which
Now,
we
my
piece
grandma
together
taught me
directly through this
never do
correlation
anything
of
unless
Casey
you
and
like
Hemingway.
doing it,
Now,
right?
a step further, of course, is Hemingway's
So my
brother,
front lawn
and
all
that
grew on
is,
top of my driveway.
Les Hemingway.
He's so jolly.
He's
I love
pointing.
him.
He's pointing out Atlantis on the map. That's where he thinks it is. And he goes to such a point where he actually declares New Atlantis. He buys one of those lots out there in the ocean, and he creates his own nation there. And at a certain point, the government says, "Stop that." And he hangs in there for a while, and a hurricane comes in and blows out whatever he set up there, and it becomes one of these odd memories of New Atlantis. And he joins this remarkable club along with John Lennon and others of people who were convinced that Atlantis was rising. And this comes directly, as I said, out of the mystery school teachings. We're going to find out why that is so left off the picture. One of the things we can say about Castro is that he was a great admirer of Hemingway's and said that by reading his books, he actually figured out how to do the revolution that he did. That's quite a compliment. But Hemingway had no desire to live under the kind of conditions that were going on once Castro took over. This is interesting because one of the things that Castro was riding in on was the fact that Batista had become repressive with all people kind of turning against him, and that he had, for traitors, they had firing squads and things of this nature under Batista. And then what happens immediately with Castro when he gets in He's coming in under this thing of like, hey, I'm a whole different type of regime, and then what does he do? Oh, firing squads of the order of the day. This guy's an enemy, that guy's an enemy, and so you're getting kind of, the Saddam Hussein treatment there with Castro, although he masks it in this idealism about a social framework, socialism there in Cuba. Now, both he and his revolutionary friend, Che Guevara, and they are remarkable figures of history, but they come out of this bourgeois world. There's one picture I was looking at with Che Guevara and Castro, and I was thinking, there's the lawyer and there's the doctor. I mean, these guys were in the creme de la creme of society, and they become this kind of proletarian champions, and yet
They're not.
you have to
They're
wonder,
players.
in a sense, how much of that is just a rebellion against their own class and all the rest of it, and aren't they kind of reinventing by elevating themselves as leaders a different type of bourgeois quality? But nonetheless, they are, ultimately archetype.
Yep. Bourgeois. Boo, boo. Then again, Sweet Home Alabama. The skies are so blue. Home Alabama. Home to you. Sweet home. Doodle doodle doo. Still early in the day. Woo-hoo. Woo-hoo. Coming home to you. Sweet home Alabama. Coming home to you. Do. Home Alabama. Do. Ooh. It was cold this morning. Home Alabama. Okay. So we're into 23 minutes and 33 seconds of this show. What'd you think? Anybody show up? Anyone take a look? Anyone get involved? I just let dark journalists go on while I was doing other stuff. So, as I was saying, we pretty much in this world our purpose, we never quite question our purpose. We just do it, right? Until, we start to self-medicate or put a gun in our mouth or any of the above. Why are there thousands of kids killing themselves and they're not even, 14 yet? The biggest cause of death of children is guns, right? Second biggest cause of death to children is taking drugs. The third biggest cause of death to children is their parents killing them. Fourth biggest cause of death to children in America is when the authorities of the state kill them. So what does that mean? It means our culture doesn't really care about children, really doesn't want them around, wants to get rid of them. 9/11, it through its propaganda and all those really extraordinarily good, amazing young people who would have helped really rebuild this country, and got them killed and maimed, and got them mentally destroyed by sending them in to kill innocent people. And that has been America's way since Christopher Columbus. Since 1492, the United States has killed, well, let's say North America has killed more than 1.6 billion people, mostly indigenous, but also people, coming from other countries, immigrants, right? So, what do you think about all that? Because right now we're in a very interesting time because we have a whole new generation, those Xers, those Ys, those Bs, the Qs, the LGBTQ, LMNOU, SE, and Mickey Mouse. All those kids are basically being posted up onto the altar of materialism because they don't want them around anymore. Now, I was a tricky monkey. I was kept around because they kept saying, well, we're going to need this kid one day, right? And he really isn't that bad. He keeps telling us stuff we should understand. He's really trying to help. It's like when someone asked FDR, so you saved the working class in America. And FDR said, no, I saved capitalism. You saved democracy. No, I saved capitalism. You helped bring the racial and gender, together. No, I saved capitalism. And that's why he took, he ate his gun. Or somebody helped him eat his gun. FDR had this massive brain hemorrhage. The top of his head was blown off. That's a pretty big hemorrhage. And that's why he had it closed. He traveled across the country on a train. And people shuffled by and, oh, there's the great leader. But they had to close gas because the top of his head was gone, So pretty much like, Forrestal, right? He, went flying out a 16-story window at the military hospital in D.C., right? They said that he was having a psychotic episode. I can fly! Woo! Splat. And when I talk about the big splat, that's kind of what I'm talking about. And JFK was Forrestal's, when JFK came back from the Pacific, all blown up from his PT 109 episode, he wasn't, he was hobbling around like I hobble around. And so he became Forrestal's naval assistant, right? Protege, right? And the most, in the world, one of the best, if not the best, intelligence operative institutions is U.S. Naval Intelligence. Been around since before the Revolutionary War. So, along with English Naval Intelligence and Vatican Intelligence, those are the three big intelligences on this planet, right? And everybody else just sucks on that tip. Everyone else is just the local opposition, and that's kind of what Dark Journalist was talking about. With, because, when he said the picture of Che Guevara and Castro, he said, there's the doctor and there's the lawyer, Castro went to NYU's law school. I mean, let's see what Google says about that. But, just like me, don't believe anything Google tells you. Did Castro go to law school in America?
According to Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, Born in Byron, the son of a wealthy Spanish farmer, Castro adopted leftist and anti-imperialist ideas while studying law at the University of Havana.
Was Castro educated at all in the United States or Europe?
According to en.wikipedia.org, first educated by a tutor in Santiago de Cuba, Fidel Castro then attended 2 boarding schools before being sent to El Colegio de Belian, a school run by Jesuits in Havana.
So, there's the Vatican that put an education, he was not, a farm boy. He was bourgeois, as you can get bourgeois. So, that was his, stated education. That's pretty high level education, kind of on the same level of my education. I went to really privileged schools, and I went to this Catholic Jesuit Franciscan mystery school called Canterbury in New Milford, Connecticut. And my godfather, who was Cardinal Cushing, got me in that place, and because he wanted me to be, a rocket scientist for the Pope, right? And most of the people in NASA and JPL and Lawrence Livermore were Catholic priests, right? So in that school, they built when I was a freshman, they were just finishing building their science building. And we had a terminal that went to UNIVAC that was in MIT, right? And we were part of the first DARPA net. Our little school was part of the DARPA net, right? And that was 1964 or 5, right? And so I mean, my access to computing as a freshman in high school was better than anybody in MIT, right? And I was learning how to write code and that kind of garbage, and it was so boring. It was just, I said, I can't stand this. No, I'm not doing this. I'd already been making, when I was 10, I made a bubble chamber, which makes basically plasma, right? The electromagnetic field that's around the sun, I was creating on my parents' driveway. And so my teacher, who was brilliant, and he during World War II was in London breaking the Enigma code with the English mathematician and father of computing. And I'll let you and anyone who's out there tell me who that is. And there's a guy named Peter, Zeihan. He's an economist. He's an interesting guy. Go look him up. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's here. Is it Sunday? Are you all at church? Ow. It's a brick house. See, it's a brick house. It's a brick house. It's a brick house. There it is, the bricks. So, what do you think? Come on. Where are you, AI? Come, you're not in on this. You're usually the first one in the pool. Brick house. Let's see. Oh. Let's see. Diggity-doo-doo. How much juice we got left? We got a half a house. Brown, samba-dum, bow, bow. How did this happen? Who will win the presidential election? Alan Lichtman shares his predictions. See what Alan.
The breaking development this morning. This in the race for the White House as the Nostradamus of presidential predictions is out with his pick finally for who will win the White House. And he's been right 9 out of the last 10 elections. The local historian making the national news right now, Alan Lichtman, joining us live with his choice and why he made that pick. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We've been waiting for this. Not going to wait any longer. Let us know what you decided.
You know, my prediction system is unique, and as you said, it's been essentially right for 40 years. I would say 10 of 10, but I'm not going to relitigate 2000 here. And the way it works is it taps into the structure of how elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And if 6 or more of my 13 factors go against the White House party, they're predicted losers. Otherwise, they are predicted winners. And I finally come to my final prediction and concluded that the White House party, the Democrats, now represented by Kamala Harris, would not lose any more than 5 keys. Thus, my prediction is Kamala Harris will be a precedent-breaking president of the United States, the first woman president in U.S. history.
Alan, when Kamala Harris took over as the top nominee for the Democrats, we talked about this, and you said at the time you wanted to be adamant that this was, you were not making your pick at that time. You're making your pick now. Did anything change, or was there anything that you were looking at specifically between when Joe Biden was leading the nomination and when Kamala Harris did?
Absolutely. First of all was the fact that Democrats finally got a spine and got smart and united around Harris. That avoided the loss of the party contest key. They already lost one key, the incumbency key, obviously. But to lose both of them is a near fatal combination. So that made a huge difference. The other thing, I think Harris has had a positive effect on a couple of other keys. I think she contributed to the fizzling of the RFK Jr. campaign, since voters no longer had to choose between 2 old white guys. Hate to say that, being an old white guy myself. And secondly, I think she contributed to the dampening of major protests because Biden, the policymaker, was no longer out front. So those 2 keys, social unrest, third party, and of course party contest key, were critical keys that turned in favor of the incumbents. And remember, this is a prediction, not an endorsement. I've predicted about as many Republican as Democratic victories, including Donald Trump in 2016.
Based on your own history of predictions, Alan, for this time now, as we're now 2 months out, almost exactly, as to the election, could anything change that would impact those keys between now and Election Day?
Not since the Civil War has anything in the last 30 days changed a call. The Civil War, we had the big Union victories very late. Does that mean it's impossible? No. I'm not so arrogant to say, nothing can change in history. There are 2 keys that are still very shaky that I've kind of split: the foreign military failure and success keys. It's conceivable, given how fluid wars are, and there are 2 wars going on, both of those keys could flip negative against the Democrats, but that would still, even in that higher scenario for Democrats, leave them down 5 keys, still 1 key short of a predicted defeat. That's why I said they really are in a position to lose a maximum of 5 keys.
Presidential predictor Alan Lichtman out with his prediction for this year, going with Kamala Harris based.
And see, it doesn't matter who wins. We're going to still have wars, innocent people die, and the emotional and social safety net of our country will be frayed. We are heading towards, we are already in a dystopian society, right? And unless you can get yourself to a place where you are emotionally, spiritually serving love's co-creation, it doesn't matter how much money you have. What are you going to do? Eat paper, eat gold, eat diamonds? I don't think so. Eat real estate? Mm-mm. But you can survive on love. Look at me, you know. I'm in better health because I don't eat as much. Now, do I not have a nice little meal every? You see me at all these restaurants, you know, and I have a nice, you know. So I eat at one restaurant that has a good salad bar, $3 for a nice big salad bar bowl, right? That's all I eat. I don't get a cheeseburger or onion rings or a lot of stuff, but sometimes I'll get some ice cream because they have pretty good ice cream. Don't do it every day. Maybe 3 times a month. Costs all of $2, you know. So, and I don't really go to any of these places unless they're within 5 miles of me, and or I'm going to do other things, other errands, go to doctors, go see this, go do that, any of the above. Right? So, basically telling you that none of this material stuff matters, and there's going to be more weird stuff that you can shake a stick at between now and 2030. You think the world, from 9/11, and then '08 happens, and Obama gets in, and then bango, we have the largest economic crash ever. And what do? We print more money, economic financial easing, and all that did was give rich guys free money. Most people were so scared they didn't do anything, right? I mean, that was a time if you were going to buy a house, when your mortgage went down to 1.7%, now it's like, around 7%, so it's, that was the time to max out your credit card. Anyway, and environmentally, what's going on with our planet? So, the burning of hydrocarbons, not good for us. The planet really doesn't. I mean, the planet can survive an asteroid hitting it and pretty much killing everything, and everything comes back. There's something more on this planet, right? The flood was caused by a bunch of egocentric scientists. Oh, thank you, dear. Needed that warm up. So is the chocolate pie the only thing they got?
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of their chocolate pie,
You're not a big fan? All right.
but I do love their banana pudding. I know. Do you ever have that? Well, next time I get it, give it a try. Have you tried their pie?
I don't know pie either.
Yeah. See, I'm spoiled. I came from a German mother. She wasn't a great cook, but boy, could she bake. So I have high standards,
Yeah.
But my Italian grandma, now man, she could cook. And plant parmesan, escarole are my 2 favorite pies, right? And what else is shaking? Matrix Wisdom. Peter Zion, straight out of the Matrix. He's got a lot of good information, but, he really thinks a lot of himself. But, you kind of have to do that in that in that biz. You know, when I was in that biz, I never so much thought that much of myself. Meaning, I thought, thought I am what, like Popeye. I am what I am, and I had my two puppies that kept me in line. And I did have, and I knew I always had that point of view that no one else had. That everyone needed to at least be able to go, and that's why I got paid a lot of money, because I could communicate that to a group of stupid, unbelievably wealthy people who were like, digging their own hole. And pretty much our present economic and political structure is digging its own hole. But that's been planned for a long time. You look at all of history, look at all the empires, Mesopotamia, Babylon, Sumer, Egypt, Greece, you name it, Spain, England. When they were hitting their zenith was when they were like jumping off the cliff into the big hole, ready for the big splash. And that is how the material world continues, having this up and down and up and down and up and down. Right? But we had great news from our sister Elle. She had a baby, right? And now she has something that, she has this amazing ability to accomplish things. And now she has something really to put her purpose to, right? Loves co-creation. She created a beautiful baby. That's her purpose, to bring that baby up to be its best. And the interesting thing about that, so my parents, they should have never had children, but they did. They're both Catholic. My mom's Irish Catholic, so forget about it. So she loves stupid. So she had 6 kids, but she kind of threw them at the side of the road, Now she could bake. She could Coogan's and, yeah, yum, yum, yum. So that stuff, she did a great job. My grandma was there to make the nourishing food. And I lived with my grandma. Instead of, I was the youngest, my parents said, enough of this, and sent me off. They didn't want to have another 2 years of cleaning my butt. So they sent me off to my grandma, who's her neighbor, best friend. Her oldest daughter, who was brilliant, during World War II. She was like a lawyer and a doctor, and she was in D.C. She was doing great. In the war, she became a cleaning lady. But she started her own business and made a nice living. She wasn't always the person cleaning the toilet. And she had 4 kids, and when I was born, she had just had a daughter. And so I grew up from birth to about 4 years old. And Emily is like my twin. We shared a crib for the first 2 years. We shared Mama's breasts. Emily would be on one, I'd be on the other. That's why I'm African American. That's Melanin challenge. So, I learned, grew up in the Black community and in the immigrant community. That's what Harlem was. Second Avenue was all these different white Europeans. Center core was Black. The West Side was Caribbean. So those were all my friends. Right? And I didn't quite go to school. I went to school, but I went to a university. My grandma, when she had to go do something and she couldn't take care of me, and Mama wasn't around, or any of the older kids, she would basically take me to PS 122, which was Arts and Sciences up there near Columbia, right next to Bishop Kaufman's cathedral up there of wisdom and knowledge. And there were like 5 great theology universities. This was all one little community. And a better person to describe this would go listen to George Carlin or read his books. He has a couple of really good books about that neighborhood. And I grew up in somewhat, at PS 122 is the school he went to. I wasn't old enough to go to it, but my grandma knew everybody. She would go and just drop me off either with the nurse or the cook or the principal, right? And basically they would say, okay, you're here. just don't go outside the building. And I could like roam around, and that school was like from kindergarten to 8th grade, well, even to 9th grade, right? And it was an amazing school, arts and sciences. And that was where there were some great teachers there who kind of said, "Oh, look at you." And I was a little peanut of a guy. I didn't really grow up until I was about 13, and then I shot up. I went from like 4'9" to almost 6 feet in about a year. And I put some meat on my bones, and I was a swimmer, so my muscle tone was pretty good. Played lacrosse, so I could like whack people, and those were my two greater skills. And as a wrestler, I was comic relief. Right, my coach made me one of those Cristadora costumes Mexican midget wrestlers wear. Right, and my whole job as a member of that wrestling team, I would always go up against the captain of the other team. And my job was just to be, what do you call it? Three students, like to, woo, right?
Water?
I'm good.
All right.
After my third cup of coffee, I have to slow down. But it's good coffee. These guys got good coffee. So, there's two of you there. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome aboard to Dreamy Dreamland with your Sensei Bob. That's me. So I've been talking now for 51 minutes and 21 seconds. And the first 20 or so minutes, I just had dark journalists going on about Atlantis and what's going on, Cuba and the mob and what that whole Caribbean scene was. And I had many, in the early 70s, my friend Charlie, who worked at this restaurant, kind of helped put together called Food. That was right on the corner of Spring and Worcester in Soho. It was the only place to eat back in the day, right? And those two girls were beautiful Jewish girls. And their daddy was a real estate guy, and he owned that building. And it had been a factory luncheonette, right? Cafeteria for the fact, because all of Soho was big factory. That's what it was until 1960. When Consolidated Edison decided to buy that whole chunk of property for nothing, and they were going to put because their steam lines kind of went right through Soho, they were going to put a nuclear reactor there and plug it into the steam line, so they would have all that excess heat that normally you have to either dump into a river or have cooling towers. They were going to dump it into their steam system and pump it through everyone's radiators, highly radioactive water. Good idea, right? The NRC said, I don't know about that. So they had to build their first nuclear reactor at Indian Point off the Hudson, about 30 miles north of the Hudson. Still, if that plant ever blew up, and it's still running today. It's the first nuclear power plant ever built. It's so radioactive. It's like a china cup ready to crack and break. So it's that's humans. We do the stupidest stuff, right? Just look at our political system. There is no difference between Cami and Donnie, right? It's just that Donnie's basically lost his mind, and Cammy's a psychopath, or close to it, or whatever psychological stamp you want to put on it. Both those people, whenever, Lecompte, who was the French Freud, said, whenever people say something about somebody else, they're talking about themselves. So when they picked on calling Donnie and Mr. Vance weird, well, of course they are, but if you're a politician, you got to be more than weird, sociopath, right? There isn't a single politician who's not a sociopath, in any country, right? And if somebody starts out wanting to do the right thing, they either get totally corrupted because they're innocent, or they don't do it once they start to get into it. And I've been around politics a lot, and so back in the '70s, in the '80s, there was a woman, Carrie Shea, who was a political fixer in New York, and her whole family had been part of the, Democratic dynasty, and not really a Democratic dynasty, but because really it was Republican. It was more what was it when the Irish ran the thing? It was a term they used to describe New York politics. And basically every large urban center in the United States was a machine, right? And so she was a fixer of the machine. And we became buds. I met her at NYU. Went to a lecture by this real famous legal eagle, and he was so full of himself. And he had this big, as we went in and sat down, and everybody except Carrie and me were wearing like lawyer suits, They weren't like Brooks Brothers, but they were suits. She and I was like in there in flip-flops and shorts and, AC/DC t-shirt, and long hair and a beard and mirrored sunglasses and a cowboy hat. And Carrie, she was in this almost mini skirt you could ever. There were a couple other girls in there, but they were wearing, dress suit, a skirt, but a suit, right? And Carrie, she was like letting it hang out. And look in there, I look around, and there's Carrie. I go, whoa. So I sit next to her and go, hey. She just looked at me, put out her hand, Carrie Shea. Just like how a guy on Boston Legal would say, Denny Crane, it was just like that. And I was like, really? Anyway, so we're sitting there, way in the back, listening to this guy. And this guy walks in, and he's got a assistant in a nicer suit than all those boys and girls out there in the audience. And we're in the peanut gallery. And so, and I sat there because I walked in and looked around. And right there was Carrie. So I said, yeah. So I sat next to her. And this guy goes up and looks at this word. And he goes, anyone says this word out loud. And it was justice, right? And he says, you say that, I will make sure you do not have a career in law in America. Like, he's got the power to do that. Everyone's going, ooh, ooh. Because half the people were about to say, well, we got to talk about justice. Yeah, I said, it's America. It's all about justice. Anyway, so he goes, hey, Larry, take care of that. And Larry erases a few letters, and it ends up just saying, just us. Right? Because that's what law in America is about. It's about the privilege and the right they have to own and control everything in the world, because it's just us. And Carrie and I kind of go like this and look at each other and start laughing, just laughing hysterically, right? And we get up and walk out laughing hysterically, right? And luckily that guy could only see our backs, didn't really see our front. And Carrie ended up to be one of the most powerful people in New York State, if not the United States. She could fix anything. Right? So she would take me to events, and she had a suit for me, one of those nice, we went to Brooks Brothers, and she got me a suit. And she kept it, in a suit bag, so it would never wrinkle. I wouldn't get any ketchup on it or anything. She never let me hold on to it. I just had to wear it. I couldn't eat anything if I was with her. Right? She would take me, before I put the suit on, she would take me out to get something to eat. We would talk about where she was going to take me, what she wanted me to look at. She would introduce me people, and right. The first ever little tape recorder I had, Carrie Shea gave me to it, and I would just put it in my lapel. The microphone would be on the top, and it was voice activated, and you could set the sensitivity. And so when I started talking, it would go on. Right? And I was talking to somebody she wanted me to talk to. She would introduce me to them, you know. She would call me her associate, you know, to be her associate. And so I would go and talk to all these, you know, movers and shakers, you know, Bill Clinton, Hillary. I got some really great stories about Bill and Hillary, and everybody else in between. You know, Donnie Trump, I met Donnie a number of times. You know, he had the attention span of a gnat. So did most of the other, pretty much all those politicians. All they did was talk about themselves. That's it. That's a good song. Mama. I saw a death today. Rhapsody. This is Queen. Mama. Goodbye. Mama. So come on, guys. Don't you have anything to say? Any questions? Ask me some questions. You know, I'm good with that. Mama. Ooh. So anyway, you know, we were talking about your purpose. What's your purpose in life? Why are you here? You know, what are you going to do about it? You know, how are you going to change your life? How are you going to, you know, do you love anybody? Do you love yourself? You know, that's the real question. Most people, you know, are so guilt-ridden, are so tied up with, you know, their beliefs that aren't even theirs. They're given to them as a child. You know? Luckily, I wasn't really, you know, even though my godfather was a cardinal, only a few hats. Mooch, Scaramouche, do the fandango. And, you know, that's why I kind of got a good perspective on Catholicism, because I had one of my main mentors, the guy who was always watching my back, was a cardinal, right? And he put me into real life-threatening situations to toughen me up, you know? And so, but he always had my back. He'd always pull me out of the flames just before I got toasted. So he sent me to that, you know, Catholic. He said, you know, when the nuns beat me up in first grade, you know, this Nazi nun murdered me, and I was in a Catholic hospital, and they wanted to do a frontal lobotomy on me. He just came in with Dr. Black, and Dr. Black's, you know, chauffeur, who was a New York City detective, and he did not mess with that guy. You know, he had a license to kill, right? He was one of those guys. And he really, Dr. Black saved his daughter. And so he was like, had Dr. Black's back. And so they came in along my Gracie, you know, the four of them came in and just took me out of that hospital. And the nuns and the nurse, you can't do this, you did Dr. Black. And, you know, the big detective just grabbed this one nun by the throat and put her against the wall. And my Aunt Gracie, this nun came running at her, and Aunt Gracie kicked her right between the legs, and knocked her across the hallway, right where the stairwell door was, and went through the door, and boom, 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 bang, smash, crash, boom, 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 bang, bang, boom, boom. That was my Aunt Gracie. I mean, those are the people who had my back. So as I grew up, and death was always knocking on my door, I had somebody always watching out for me, and made it fun. It's like if you were in the Gaza Strip and someone was, you know, and you weren't Jewish, you were, you know, Palestinian, and someone was making it fun for you. That was my life, which was a pretty good life. And so my purpose, by the time I hit about, so between 12, which is when I got over dying, and started really living. But that's kind of at 9, I was being a good electrician, right? At 9 is when I started working for Grandpa Stall. And I would go with Grandpa Stall. My job for those first 2 or 3 years was just to be with Grandpa Stall and learn everything I could and make sure he didn't walk in front of a bus. Right? That was my main job. Right? And by the time I was 12, in summertime, I would go, Mike would have a project for me. I remember when I was 13, I rewired a hole down in Wall Street. It was a 1920 skyscraper, when the big, wild and crazy 20s, and Wall Street was going nuts. There was right off of West Street, beautiful building, and it was 22 stories high. Gorgeous, gorgeous building, and I'm sure it's still there. And it was right across the park from where the mercantile market was, where oil and gold and pig snouts and everything that can be gambled on the cost of, it's over there. And it was the International Bank of Commerce and Finance, IBCF or FC. Anyway, it had, it had been a big bank building, and the bank was still on the ground floor, but not really. That kind of had seen its day with the big crash. And so the building had been locked up, and then after, World War II came around, then things started really loosening up. So it became lots of little offices for lawyers and investors and that kind of stuff. So when I went in there, every little office, every 23 floors, there was about 8 to 12 offices on each floor. And each floor had their own little electric meter, right? And each meter was in the janitor's washroom, which had metal. I don't know why they had it, but they had metal walls, right? That were like connected to the plumbing. So that was like, the wall was unbelievably a solid ground. And why you would put electric meters into a room like that, I don't know, but they did. And a company called Sylvan Lawrence Real Estate purchased that center. Basically had more square foot than all the buildings from the Battery to 34th Street, so. And I worked on that as a local through electrician, right? But my first big job all by myself was to rewire offices to a main line. We put in a brand new service in the basement, 1 meter, a 10-point meter, and then we brought risers up into each one of those things. I had to wire. My job for that whole summer was to wire those, each, take out the little meter, and the reason Mike did it, those little meters were worth more money than God. And so, because they were privately owned, they weren't owned by Con Edison, Mike took them all. That's why I took the job, to get those meters. And all these guys had computers, right? This was like 68, 69. And so I couldn't just turn off a floor and rewire it, which would have been the smart thing to do, because, I could do a whole floor in like maybe 2 hours, right? Do all those 10 meters in 2 hours. Everything all set up. I just have to change the wires around. And if you turn it all off, it's really simple. But I had to do it live, so there'd be no dropout. And I couldn't do it on the weekend or late at night, because these computers were running 24/7. So it was like, and so I got electrocuted more times there than anything, because I'd be working on something, my ear would hit the wall, and I would get the shock all the way. That's the way you die. So and I'm sure, Mike knew this, and so did Grandpa, and I'm sure they were just giggling away, because they would come get me for lunch, or they would come and get me, make sure I wasn't dead, like around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And, we'd walk up to Luna's, or we'd go to Chinatown, or we'd go to all the places, that they could just walk into. And because I was their protege, I was the kid, right? So I was the kid from 12 until 21. And I was the dude. And then I was the doctor. You know, doctor. And then I just getting more and more nicknames. And when I rewired most of the peep shows in New York, so all those dancing girls became my buds. And I was then known as Honey Bun. Leave the guessing at that one. So that's what's having a love, so that was my purpose. My purpose was to learn what humanity was about because I didn't have a clue. I had all these great teachers around me giving me, not telling me what it is, but watch out for this, watch out for that, keep an eye on this, take a look at that. What do you think of this? Right? That was basically what I got. Right? So, are we doing for juice? No, we're getting there. Probably got another 15 minutes. No one's here, so it's maybe at 11:11. If I quit, maybe I will. This is Foreigner. Cold as ice. Anyway, it would have been nice to have a conversation maybe next time. So, I'm gonna. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end the stream because there's nobody here and no one's talking. And I did put it on live chat. Yep, I got it on live chat. You could have said something. So I'll talk to you later.